Good evening all, and welcome back to Farcical Fears. He'd been inside their house for hours, hiding in the attic crawl space right above the living room where they sat opening presents, laughing, singing carols, completely unaware. When his voice finally came through the heating vent, it was calm, almost friendly. He said he'd been doing this every Christmas for 3 years, just watching. Waiting. Tonight, 3 true stories that prove the holidays aren't always safe. A secret Santa who knew too much, a family trapped with an intruder already inside, and a small-town Santa who whispered secrets he couldn't possibly know. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe to Farcical Fears for daily true horror content that will keep you up at night. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when the darkness calls. Let's begin. Story 1. The Gift Exchange. The third gift wasn't wrapped like the others. It was a plain USB drive sitting inside a small velvet box. No card, no name, no festive ribbon. Just a black rectangle of plastic that weighed almost nothing, but somehow felt heavier than anything I'd ever held. When I plugged it into my laptop that night, alone in my apartment with the blinds drawn and the door triple locked, I heard my own voice. A phone call I'd made 3 weeks earlier, sitting on my couch in the dark, crying to my sister about my divorce, about how I felt like I'd wasted 8 years of my life, about how some nights I couldn't even get out of bed. I never told anyone at work about that call. I never told anyone at work about my divorce at all. I never told anyone my new address, my new phone number, or my cat's name. But someone knew. Someone had been listening, and I had no idea how long it had been going on. Let me start from the beginning. That December, I'd just started a new job at a mid-sized accounting firm in downtown Minneapolis. My name is Meredith Vance. I was 34 years old, recently divorced after 8 years of marriage, and trying desperately to rebuild some version of a normal life. The divorce had been finalized in August. It wasn't dramatic. No screaming matches, no infidelity, no thrown dishes. It was worse than that. It was quiet. A slow erosion of everything we'd built until one morning we looked at each other across the breakfast table and realized we were strangers. He got the house. I got the freedom to start over. I moved into a new apartment in September, a 1-bedroom on the 3rd floor of a building in a neighborhood where no one knew my name. That was the point. I wanted to disappear for a while. I wanted to exist in a space where no one had expectations of me, where I didn't have to explain why I wasn't wearing my ring anymore, or why I flinched every time someone asked how my husband was doing. The apartment was small but clean. Good light in the afternoons. A decent view of the parking lot and the strip mall across the street. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I kept to myself at the office. I smiled in the hallways, made small talk in the break room about the weather and the Vikings and whether the coffee machine was ever going to get fixed. But I never shared anything personal. I didn't talk about my weekends or my family or my life outside those walls. I wasn't ready for that yet. I was still figuring out who I was without the word wife attached to my identity. The job was fine. Numbers and spreadsheets and quarterly reports. The kind of work that doesn't require you to feel anything, which was exactly what I needed. My manager was a woman named Patricia, who wore too much perfume and ended every email with "best," as if she meant it. My coworkers were pleasant enough, the usual mix of people counting down to retirement and recent graduates who still thought corporate America was going to be an adventure. I did my work, collected my paycheck, and went home to my cat and my silence. But what happened next changed everything. The office had this tradition, a secret Santa exchange. 3 gifts spread across the month of December, each one a little bigger than the last. I wasn't going to sign up. I've never been good at that kind of thing. What do you buy for someone you've only known for 2 months? What do you buy for someone when you don't even know their middle name, or whether they prefer chocolate or vanilla? but Patricia made it sound mandatory. "It's great for team building," she said, cornering me by the water cooler with that aggressive smile of hers. "Really gets everyone in the holiday spirit." I didn't have the energy to argue. I put my name in the hat, drew someone named Kevin from accounting who I'd never spoken to, and figured I'd buy some generic candles or a gift card and call it a day. I didn't think about it again. The first gift appeared on my desk December 5th. I came back from lunch, and there it was, a small box wrapped in red paper with a silver bow, sitting right next to my keyboard. There was no card, no name tag, just the box. I opened it carefully, peeling back the paper like I was defusing a bomb, and inside was a tin of loose-leaf tea. Oolong, from a small company in Vermont called Mountain Mist. It was my favorite. I'd been drinking it for years, ever since I discovered it at a farmer's market back when I still lived in Wisconsin. Here's the thing. I'd never mentioned it to anyone at work. Not once. Not in passing. Not in small talk. Not in any of those endless conversations about what everyone was drinking or eating or watching. I kept the tin in my desk drawer, tucked behind a stack of folders where no one would see it. I made my tea in the break room early in the morning or late in the afternoon when no one else was around. I was careful about it because I didn't want to share. It was mine. My small comfort in a place that didn't feel like home. I turned the tin over in my hands, reading the label, trying to figure out how this had happened. Maybe someone saw the tin in my bag one day when I was digging for my keys. Maybe someone noticed me drinking it and did some detective work. I told myself it was thoughtful. Impressively thoughtful, even. Someone paying attention. Someone who cared enough to notice the little things. I put the tin in my drawer with the other one and felt something warm in my chest that I hadn't felt in months. I was flattered. I should have been terrified. The next week passed without incident. I did my work, attended meetings, nodded along to Patricia's motivational speeches about end-of-year targets. I found myself looking around the office more than usual, trying to catch someone's eye, trying to figure out who my secret Santa might be. Was it David from HR, the one who always held the door open for me? Was it the quiet woman in the corner cubicle whose name I could never remember? I felt like I was in high school again, waiting to find out who had a crush on me. It was silly. It was distracting. It was the most excitement I'd had in months. December 12th, another box on my desk. This time, it was heavier, wrapped in green paper with a gold ribbon. I opened it at my desk, not even bothering to wait until I was alone. Inside was a Christmas ornament, a photo frame shaped like a snowflake, made of painted ceramic with little rhinestones along the edges. It was the kind of thing you'd find at a craft fair, handmade and delicate. And already inside the frame, already positioned behind the glass, was a picture. My cat. Biscuit. Curled up on my windowsill, the way she always does in the afternoon, when the sun comes through the glass and makes a warm rectangle on the cushion. Her orange fur was glowing in the light. Her eyes were half closed. She looked peaceful. She looked exactly the way she looks every single day at 3 p.m. when the sun hits that spot just right. The photo was taken from outside my apartment. I felt the blood drain from my face. My hands went cold. I looked at the picture again, trying to convince myself I was wrong, trying to find some other explanation. But there was no other explanation. The angle was wrong for it to be taken from inside. You could see the reflection of the glass in the corner. You could see the edge of the window frame. Someone had stood outside my building, in the parking lot maybe, or on the sidewalk across the street, with a camera and a zoom lens, and they had photographed my cat through my window. I lived on the 3rd floor. There's no balcony on that side, no fire escape. No way anyone could have gotten that shot unless they were specifically trying to. Unless they knew which window was mine. Unless they'd been watching. I sat at my desk staring at that ornament for what felt like an hour. People walked by. Phones rang. Someone laughed at something in the break room. The world kept moving, and I sat there frozen, holding a picture of my cat that shouldn't exist. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was that I didn't do anything. I put the ornament in my desk drawer, underneath the tea tins, and I told myself I was overreacting. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe I'd posted a picture of Biscuit on social media, and someone had seen it. Maybe I'd mentioned her name to someone, and they'd done some digging. People do that, right? People Google their coworkers. It's weird, but it's not dangerous. I went home that night and checked all my social media accounts, looking for any picture that could have been the source. There was nothing. I hadn't posted a photo of Biscuit in over a year. And the picture in that ornament was recent. I could tell by the new curtains I'd put up in October. Someone had taken that photo within the last 2 months. Someone had been watching my apartment. And I had no idea who. I didn't sleep well that night. Or the next night. Or the night after that. I started closing my blinds as soon as the sun went down, even though I'd always loved looking out at the city lights. I started checking the parking lot before I walked to my car, scanning the shadows for anyone who might be lingering. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself that Secret Santa was supposed to be fun, and maybe this was just someone's misguided attempt at being thoughtful. Maybe they thought it would be sweet. Maybe they didn't realize how creepy it was. I almost convinced myself. But what happened next shattered that illusion completely. I went to HR on December 14th, sat down across from Denise, the HR manager, a woman in her 50s, with a tight smile and a motivational poster behind her desk that said, "Teamwork makes the dream work." I showed her the ornament, told her about the tea, explained that someone at this company knew things about me that they shouldn't know, that someone had photographed my cat through my window, that I felt unsafe. Denise listened with her head tilted to one side, making sympathetic noises, writing things down in a notebook with a pen that had a fuzzy pom-pom on the end. When I finished, she set down the pen and gave me that smile again. "I understand this feels uncomfortable," she said. "But Secret Santa is supposed to be fun. Maybe someone is just being extra thoughtful. Maybe they're trying to show you that they notice you." I stared at her. "They photographed my cat through my window." She nodded slowly. "And that does seem enthusiastic. But I'm sure there's an explanation. I'll look into it and get back to you." She never got back to me. One of my coworkers, a guy named Greg from sales, overheard me in the hallway afterward. He was the type who always had an opinion, always had something to say, always thought he was the smartest person in the room. "Heard you're having some Secret Santa drama," he said, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. "Maybe it's just someone with a crush who's bad at boundaries. You should be flattered." I wanted to hit him. I wanted to scream. Instead, I smiled tightly and walked away. I went back to my desk and stared at my computer screen without seeing anything. I was alone. No one believed me. No one thought this was serious. And somewhere out there, someone was watching. December 19th, 4 days before the office holiday party. I came in early that morning, before anyone else arrived, and there it was. A velvet box, dark blue, sitting on my keyboard. Smaller than the other gifts, more elegant. I knew before I opened it that this was different. This was the one that would change everything. I lifted the lid slowly, like I was opening a coffin. Inside, nestled in white satin, was a USB drive. Plain. Black. No label. I didn't plug it in at work. I couldn't. I waited until I got home that night, until I'd checked every room in my apartment, until I'd locked the door and wedged a chair under the handle and closed every blind and curtain. I sat on my couch with my laptop on my knees, and my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I plugged in the drive. 3 audio files. That's all. 3 audio files with dates as their names. I clicked the first one. It was me. My voice. A phone call with my sister from Thanksgiving night, 3 weeks earlier. We'd talked for almost an hour. I'd called her from my couch, in the dark, with a glass of wine and a box of tissues. I'd told her everything. How the divorce had hollowed me out. How I felt like a failure. How some nights I lay in bed and wondered if anyone would notice if I just stopped existing. She'd listened and cried with me and told me I was stronger than I knew. It was one of the most vulnerable conversations I'd ever had, and someone had recorded it. The second file was a call with my mother from early December. We'd talked about Christmas plans, about whether I should come home or stay in Minneapolis, about the sweater she was knitting for Biscuit. Normal stuff. Mundane stuff. But it was still my voice, still my private conversation, still something that no one should have had access to. The third file was the worst. A conversation with my divorce attorney from October. A call where I'd broken down completely, sobbing for 20 minutes straight, asking her if I'd made the right decision, if I was going to be alone forever, if there was any chance my ex-husband would take me back. I'd said things I'd never said to anyone else, things I was ashamed of, things I thought would stay between me and the woman I was paying $300 an hour to listen to me fall apart. Someone had access to my phone, or my apartment, or both. They'd been listening to my calls for months, maybe longer, maybe since before I even started at this job. I unplugged the USB drive and threw it across the room. It hit the wall and clattered to the floor. Biscuit jumped off the couch and ran under the bed. I sat there in the dark, shaking, trying to breathe, trying to think. But what I discovered next made me realize how long this had been going on. I spent the next 3 days barely sleeping, barely eating, running through every possibility in my mind. I changed all my passwords, every account, every app, every device. I put tape over my laptop camera and my phone camera. I bought a signal detector online and swept my apartment for bugs. I didn't find anything, but that didn't make me feel better. It just meant whoever was doing this was smarter than me. I started watching everyone at the office with new eyes. Every glance felt loaded. Every smile felt suspicious. Who looked at me too long in the hallway? Who knew my schedule? Knew when I took my lunch? Knew when I stayed late? Who had access to the Secret Santa list? I made a list of suspects. It had 12 names on it. Then 20. Then I realized it could be anyone. It could be everyone. The holiday party was scheduled for December 22nd. I had a plan. I'd been thinking about it for days, running through the details, trying to account for every variable. I was going to set a trap. Before I left for the party, I placed a fake 4th gift on my desk, a decoy wrapped in green paper with a red bow, positioned right next to my keyboard, where all the other gifts had appeared. If someone came for it, if someone couldn't resist checking to see what I'd left for myself, I'd know. I hid a small camera in my pencil cup, angled toward my desk, connected to an app on my phone. Motion activated. Silent. Invisible. The party was in the conference room on the 3rd floor. Catered food, cheap wine, a playlist of Christmas songs that had probably been the same since 1987. I stood in the corner with a glass of sparkling water, watching the door, watching my phone, waiting. Patricia gave a speech about what a great year it had been. Someone from accounting got drunk and started crying about their ex-boyfriend. Greg from sales tried to get me to stand under the mistletoe with him. I smiled and declined and kept my eyes on my phone. At 7:47 p.m., it buzzed. Motion alert. I ducked into the bathroom and opened the app. The footage was grainy but clear enough. A man standing at my desk. He was holding the fake gift, turning it over in his hands, examining it from every angle. He was smiling at it like it was something precious, something he'd been waiting for. I watched him run his thumb along the ribbon. I watched him lift it to his ear and shake it gently. I watched his face in the glow of my desk lamp. I recognized him. His name was Elliot. He worked in IT. I'd spoken to him maybe twice in the 3 months I'd been there. Once when my computer crashed in October, and he'd come to fix it. And once when I couldn't figure out how to connect to the printer. He was quiet. Unremarkable. The kind of person you pass in the hallway without ever really seeing. Brown hair, glasses, polo shirts in muted colors. He'd never said anything memorable. He'd never done anything to make me notice him. He was wallpaper. Background noise. And apparently, he'd been watching me for months. I found him in the server room 20 minutes later. He was alone, sitting at a workstation, scrolling through something on his screen. The room was cold and humming with the sound of cooling fans. I closed the door behind me. He looked up, confused, his face flickering with something I couldn't read. "Meredith, is everything okay?" I walked toward him slowly. My hands were shaking, but my voice was steady. "I know it's you." I pulled out my phone and showed him the footage, his face on the screen, holding my fake gift, smiling that secret smile. "I know you're my secret Santa. I know about the tea, the ornament, the recordings. I know everything." His face went pale. His mouth opened and closed. He looked like a fish gasping for air. But he didn't deny it. He didn't run. He didn't try to explain it away or tell me I was crazy. Instead, he said something that made my legs buckle. Something that made the floor tilt beneath my feet. I was just delivering them. I stared at him. What? I was just delivering them. The gifts. I didn't pick them out. I didn't know what was in them. He was talking fast now, words tumbling over each other. I got instructions, anonymous emails telling me what to buy, where to put it, what to write on the card. Except there were never any cards. They said no cards. Just leave it on your desk when you weren't there. I thought it was part of the game. I thought someone was just being elaborate. I didn't know it was. I didn't know. He showed me his inbox, pulled up a folder labeled Secret Santa, and scrolled through the emails. There were dozens of them, starting in early November, before I'd even put my name in the hat, before I'd even signed up for the exchange. The sender address was a burner account, random numbers, and letters at a free email provider. No name, no signature, no identifying information, just instructions. Buy the oolong tea from Mountain Mist, the one in the blue tin. Leave it on her desk December 5th, before 9 a.m. The ornament is ready for pickup at the craft fair on 3rd Street, booth 47. Pay cash. Leave it on her desk December 12th. USB drive enclosed. Do not open. Do not copy. Leave on her desk December 19th, early morning. The emails were detailed, specific. Whoever sent them knew my tea brand, my cat's name, my apartment number, my phone number, my sister's name. They knew things about me that I'd never told anyone at work. They knew things about me that I'd barely admitted to myself. Elliot looked at me with something like horror in his eyes. "I thought it was romantic," he whispered. "I thought maybe it was your boyfriend or something, trying to surprise you. I didn't think. I never thought." He trailed off, hands trembling on the keyboard. The IT guy was just a pawn, a delivery mechanism, a useful idiot with building access and no questions asked. The real person watching me was never found. I quit that job 2 days later, didn't give 2 weeks' notice, didn't even clean out my desk. I just sent Patricia an email at 3 a.m. saying I wouldn't be coming back, and then blocked every work email address I could think of. I called a locksmith the next morning and had every lock in my apartment changed. New deadbolt, new chain, new everything. I threw away my phone and bought a new one with a new number. I swept the apartment again with the signal detector, then hired a professional to do it properly. He didn't find anything. That didn't make me feel better. I moved out of that apartment in January, packed up everything I owned in the middle of the night, and drove to a storage unit across town. I stayed in hotels for a while, never the same one twice, paying cash when I could. I moved out of Minnesota entirely by February. New state, new job, new name on the mailbox. I won't tell you where. I hope you understand. I hired a private investigator, a guy named Marcus, who came recommended by my divorce attorney, who was the only person from my old life I still trusted. Marcus spent 3 months looking into it, 3 months of dead ends and cold trails and apologies. The email account had been deleted. The IP addresses were routed through VPNs and public computers. There were no fingerprints on any of the gifts. Elliot had been wearing gloves because it was winter, he said, not because he was trying to hide anything. No witnesses, no cameras in my old building's parking lot that could have caught whoever photographed Biscuit. Marcus told me, as gently as he could, that whoever did this knew what they were doing. They were careful, patient, smart. Whoever watched me that December is still out there. Maybe they've moved on to someone else. Maybe they found a new target at that office, another quiet woman who keeps to herself and just wants to be left alone. Maybe they're watching someone right now, learning their routines, memorizing their schedules, photographing their pets through their windows. Or maybe they're still watching me. Maybe they followed me to my new city, my new apartment, my new life. Maybe they're patient enough to wait. Maybe they're watching me right now. I check my windows every night before I go to bed. I keep the blinds closed even during the day. I don't use the same password twice. I don't tell anyone my address, not even my sister. I don't participate in Secret Santa anymore. I don't participate in anything that requires me to trust strangers with information about my life. I'll never know who they were. I'll never know how they found me, or why they chose me, or what they wanted. I'll never know if they're still out there, still watching, still waiting. And that's what keeps me awake. Sometimes the threat is someone hiding in plain sight, blending in, smiling at you in the break room, asking how your weekend was while they memorize the details for later. But other times, they're not hiding at all. They're already inside your house. Waiting. Story 2. Silent night. The voice came through the heating vent at 11:47 p.m. I remember the exact time because I'd just checked my phone, wondering how much longer until midnight, until Christmas officially arrived. The voice was calm, polite even, like he was greeting an old friend he hadn't seen in years. I've been watching your family for 3 Christmases now. This is my favorite room in the house. You always put the tree in the same corner. You always hang the same ornaments. Loretta's angel on top, the wooden reindeer that Dean made in 3rd grade, the glass snowflake that belonged to Frank's mother. My mother screamed. Not a horror movie scream, something worse. A sound that came from somewhere deep and primal. The sound of a person realizing that everything they thought was safe has been a lie. My girlfriend Amelia grabbed my arm so hard her nails broke the skin. I still have the scars, 4 little crescents on my forearm that will never fade. And somewhere above us, in the attic crawl space that we never used, that we'd barely thought about in 30 years of living in this house, I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate. The footsteps of someone who had all the time in the world. He'd been inside the house for hours. He'd been inside the house for years. And we'd never known. Let me tell you how we got there. December 24th, 2021. I was 28 years old, driving up to my parents' farmhouse in upstate New York with my girlfriend Amelia. We'd been together for 2 years, and this was her first time spending Christmas with my family. I wanted everything to be perfect. The drive took about 4 hours from the city, winding through smaller and smaller towns until the buildings gave way to fields, then forests, then nothing but white. It had been snowing since morning, the kind of heavy, silent snowfall that makes the world feel like it's wrapped in cotton. By the time we pulled into my parents' driveway, there were already 6 inches on the ground, and more coming down. My parents had owned that farmhouse for 30 years. They'd bought it the year I was born, a fixer-upper on 12 acres of land in the middle of nowhere. Nearest neighbor was 2 miles down the road. Nearest town was a 15-minute drive, the kind of place where you could scream as loud as you wanted and no one would hear you. I never thought about that as a kid. It just felt like freedom. Space to run, to explore, to be loud without bothering anyone. The house itself was old, built in the 1920s, added onto haphazardly over the decades, full of strange corners and uneven floors and doors that didn't quite fit their frames. I grew up there. I knew every creak in the floorboards, every draft from the old windows, every spot where the pipes rattled when you ran hot water. I thought I knew that house better than I knew myself. But what happened next changed everything. My sister Nina was already there when we arrived. She was home from college for winter break, a junior at Syracuse, studying something with computers that I never fully understood. She met us at the door with hugs and hot cocoa, her cheeks flushed from the cold. My parents were in the kitchen. My dad, Frank, 62 years old, and built like a retired linebacker, stirring something on the stove. My mom, Loretta, 59, arranging cookies on a plate like she was preparing for a magazine photo shoot. The house smelled like pine and cinnamon and roasting meat. There was a fire going in the living room, Christmas music playing softly from the old stereo system my dad refused to replace. It was the kind of Christmas Eve you see in movies, the kind you remember forever. Just not for the reasons you'd want. Around 6 p.m., I went to grab another log for the fire. The woodpile was in the basement, stacked against the far wall next to the old furnace. I walked past the basement door and noticed something on the hardwood floor. Wet boot prints. A trail of them, leading from the basement stairs toward the back hallway. I stopped and looked at them for a moment, frowning. The prints were large, bigger than mine, bigger than my dad's. They tracked water and bits of slush across the floor, already starting to dry at the edges. I figured my dad had been down to the basement earlier, maybe checking on something, and tracked in snow from the woodpile. The exterior basement door opened to the backyard, and sometimes snow drifted against it and got inside when you opened it. I didn't think about it again. I grabbed the firewood, went back to the living room, and forgot about the boot prints entirely. That was my first mistake. An hour later, we were all in the kitchen helping with dinner, or pretending to help, mostly just getting in Loretta's way and stealing bites of things we weren't supposed to touch yet. That's when Amelia came in from the hallway, her face pale, her eyes wide. I heard footsteps upstairs. We all looked at each other. My dad was at the stove. My mom was at the counter. Nina was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone. I was leaning against the refrigerator with a beer in my hand. Everyone was in the kitchen. Everyone had been in the kitchen for at least 20 minutes. My mom laughed, the way you laugh when something startles you, but you don't want to admit it. Old house, honey. It settles, makes all kinds of noises, especially when it's cold outside. She waved her hand dismissively. You get used to it after a while. Amelia nodded, but I saw her eyes. She wasn't convinced. She looked at me, a question in her expression, and I shrugged. She's right, I said. This place has been making weird noises since I was a kid. Pipes, floorboards, the wind in the attic. It's nothing. I believed that. I really did. But some part of me, some small, quiet part that I didn't want to listen to, felt a cold finger trace down my spine. I ignored it. I took another sip of my beer and changed the subject. But that wasn't even the worst part. Around 9 p.m., After dinner had been eaten and dishes had been washed, and we'd all settled into the living room to watch one of those old stop-motion Christmas specials my parents loved, I went down to the basement to grab more wine from the storage rack. The basement was cold and damp, the way basements always are in old houses. Bare bulb overhead, concrete floor, the smell of dust and motor oil. I walked past the furnace, past the stack of firewood, past the old boxes of Christmas decorations we hadn't used in years. When I reached the wine rack, I noticed something. The exterior door, the one that opens to the backyard, was unlocked. I stood there staring at it, the bottle of Merlot in my hand, trying to remember. I'd been down here that morning, first thing, to bring in more firewood before the snow got too deep. I'd locked that door myself. I remembered checking it twice, rattling the handle to make sure it caught. I was careful about things like that. I always had been. I locked it again, turned the deadbolt, checked the handle, made sure it was secure. I told myself the latch was faulty. Old house, old doors, old hardware. Things slipped. Things came loose. It didn't mean anything. But when I climbed back up the basement stairs, I found myself looking over my shoulder. Just once. Just to make sure. But what I found next made my stomach drop. Nina came downstairs around 10, just as we were starting another movie. She'd gone up to her old bedroom to grab a sweater, and when she came back down, she looked annoyed. "Who closed my bedroom door? I left it open." No one answered. We all looked at each other, the same look we'd shared earlier when Amelia heard the footsteps. My dad was on the couch. My mom was in her armchair. Amelia was curled up next to me under a blanket. No one had been upstairs. No one had left the living room in at least half an hour. My dad made a joke about ghosts. "Maybe it's old Mrs. Henderson," he said, referencing a woman who died in the house sometime in the 50s, long before my parents bought the place. "She never liked doors left open. Drafty, she used to say." He laughed at his own joke, the way he always did. My mom rolled her eyes and changed the subject. Nina sat down on the floor in front of the fire, wrapping herself in the sweater. But I saw her face. She wasn't laughing. She looked unsettled in a way I'd never seen before. Something was wrong with this house. Something had been wrong all day. But I told myself it was nothing. I told myself we were all just tired, wound up from the holidays, imagining things. I kept telling myself that, until I couldn't anymore. At 11:30 p.m., everyone was in the living room. The fire had burned down to embers. The TV was playing some old Christmas movie none of us were really watching. My dad was half asleep in his chair. My mom was knitting something. She always knitted at Christmas, scarves and hats and mittens for people who didn't need them. Nina was on her phone. Amelia was warm against my side, her head on my shoulder, her breathing slow and even. It was peaceful. It was perfect. It was the last perfect moment we'd ever have in that house. I got up to use the bathroom in the hallway. Not the one upstairs, the small half bath near the kitchen, the one my parents had added in the 80s when they got tired of climbing stairs in the middle of the night. I walked down the hallway in the dark, not bothering to turn on the lights. I'd made this walk 1,000 times before. That's when I passed the heating vent in the floor. The house had an old forced air heating system, with vents cut into the floors in most of the rooms. The vent in the hallway was a big one, about 2 feet by 1 foot, covered with a decorative iron grate. In the winter, warm air would blow up through it, and as a kid, I used to stand on it in my socks and feel the heat rise up around my legs. But the heat wasn't on right now. The house was warm enough from the fire. I don't know why I looked down. Instinct, maybe. Some ancient part of my brain that recognized danger before my conscious mind caught up. But I looked down through the metal grate, and through the slats, I could see into the crawl space below. The crawl space that led to the attic access hatch. The crawl space that ran through the walls and under the floors and above the ceilings, connecting parts of the house that weren't supposed to be connected. Something moved. It was just a shadow at first, a shift in the darkness, like something had adjusted its position. But then I saw the outline, a shoulder, an arm, the side of a face pressed against the wooden beams. Someone was lying in the crawl space, just a few feet below me, watching the living room through the vent. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I stood there frozen, staring down through the grate, and the shadow stared back up at me. We looked at each other for what felt like an eternity, and then, very slowly, the shadow smiled. Then the power went out. Total darkness. My mother screamed. That primal scream I'll never forget. I heard Amelia calling my name, heard my father stumbling to his feet, heard Nina somewhere behind me asking what happened. What's going on? Why did the lights go out? I ran back to the living room, moving on instinct, on muscle memory, bouncing off walls I couldn't see. "Everyone stay calm," I said, even though my voice was shaking. "Stay calm. It's probably just the storm." But I knew it wasn't the storm. The storm had been going for hours, and the power had been fine. Someone had cut the power. Someone who knew exactly where the breaker box was. Someone who had been in this house before. I tried my phone. No signal. The farmhouse was in a dead zone, had always been in a dead zone. That was part of its charm, my parents said. No distractions, no connection to the outside world, just family. I'd never thought of it as a problem before. Now it felt like a death sentence. The landline was in the kitchen. My dad went to check it, stumbling through the dark. I heard him pick up the receiver. I heard him press the button. I heard nothing. The line was dead. Someone had cut it. We weren't alone, and we couldn't call for help. We moved fast after that. Adrenaline takes over when you're scared enough, and we were all scared enough. We pushed the couch against the hallway door, the only entrance to the living room besides the windows. My dad went to the hall closet and got his hunting rifle, the Remington 870 he'd had since before I was born. He checked to make sure it was loaded, hands steady despite everything. Thank God it was still there. Thank God whoever was in the house hadn't found it first. We huddled in the living room, 5 of us, backs to the fireplace. The embers gave off just enough light to see each other's faces. My mom was crying silently, tears streaming down her cheeks. Nina was hyperventilating, trying to keep it together. Failing. Amelia was pressed against me so tight I could feel her heartbeat through her sweater. My dad stood in front of us, rifle raised, pointed at the barricaded door. We waited. We listened. The house was silent except for our breathing. Silent except for the wind outside. Silent except for... there. A creak, coming from upstairs. Then another. Footsteps. Moving down the hallway above us. Moving toward the stairs. The attic hatch. That's what I heard next. The attic hatch in the upstairs hallway. The one that led to the crawl space. The one we never opened because there was nothing up there but insulation and dust. I heard it creak open. Slow. Deliberate. Like whoever was up there wanted us to hear it. Wanted us to know they were coming. The footsteps moved to the top of the stairs. And then they stopped. But what happened next froze me to my core. He didn't come downstairs. Not yet. Instead, he walked to the upstairs hallway vent, the one directly above us, the one that connected to the same duct system as the vent I'd looked through earlier, and he spoke. His voice came through the metal grate, filtered and strange, like he was speaking from inside the walls. "I've been watching your family for 3 Christmases now." My mother's sobs got louder. Nina was shaking so hard I could hear her teeth chattering. "You leave the basement door unlocked every year. Did you know that? Every single year, sometime during the holidays, someone forgets to check the lock. You never check the attic. You never look up. You sing the same carols. You open presents in the same order. Frank first, then Loretta, then Nina, then Dean. He knew our names. He knew our routines. He knew things about our family that we barely knew ourselves. I know Frank takes his coffee black with 2 sugars. I know Loretta hides presents in the linen closet behind the extra towels. I know Nina failed her chemistry midterm last semester and didn't tell anyone. I know Dean sleeps on the left side of the bed and talks in his sleep. Last night, he said Amelia's name and something about a ring. Amelia looked at me, her eyes wide. I'd been planning to propose on Christmas morning. I'd told no one. I'd thought about it, dreamed about it, talked to myself about it in the dark when I couldn't sleep. And somehow, he knew. He knew everything, and he'd been patient. My dad's hands were steady on the rifle, but his voice was not. Come down here and say that to my face. Silence. Then a laugh. Quiet. Soft. Almost sad. Like a parent indulging a child who doesn't understand the situation. I'm not here to hurt you. I never was. I just wanted you to know I was here. That I've always been here. That I know you better than you know yourselves. My dad took a step toward the door. Who are you? What do you want? I want what everyone wants, Frank. To be part of a family. To belong somewhere. I've been alone for so long. And your family, this house, these traditions, this love you all have for each other. It's beautiful. I didn't want to take it. I just wanted to be near it, to feel it, even if you didn't know I was there. There was something in his voice that was almost heartbreaking. Almost. But I thought about the boot prints in the hallway, the unlocked door, the closed bedroom, all the little signs we'd ignored. He hadn't just been watching. He'd been living with us, eating our food, maybe, sleeping in our crawl spaces, breathing the same air, for 3 years. You're sick, my mother said, her voice raw from crying. You need help. Maybe. But not tonight. Tonight, I just wanted to say goodbye. I knew this would be the last Christmas. I knew you'd find me eventually. I just wanted one more night. We heard the attic hatch close, footsteps moving toward the back of the house. Then a window breaking upstairs, Nina's bedroom from the sound of it. Glass shattering, wood splintering, cold air rushing in. My dad ran for the stairs, rifle raised. I was right behind him. We took the steps 2 at a time, not caring about noise anymore, not caring about anything except getting to that window, seeing who this person was, stopping them before they disappeared into the night. By the time we got to Nina's bedroom, he was gone. The window was shattered, curtains blowing in the wind, snow already piling on the sill. Outside, in the white glow of the storm, I could see footprints leading away from the house, deep prints in the fresh snow, heading toward the tree line, already filling in, already disappearing. My dad raised the rifle, sighted down the barrel, but there was nothing to shoot at. Just snow and darkness and the distant shapes of trees. He was gone. But what the police found changed everything. The police arrived at dawn. We'd spent the rest of the night huddled in the living room, no one sleeping, no one talking, just waiting for the sun to come up, waiting for help to arrive. As soon as it was light enough to see, my dad walked the 2 miles to the nearest neighbor's house and called 911. The rest of us stayed in the living room with the rifle and the remains of the fire and each other. The officers searched the house. They searched the attic. They searched the crawl space. What they found made one of them, a young guy, couldn't have been more than 25, excuse himself to throw up in the backyard. The crawl space was a nest. Blankets and sleeping bags piled in the corner where the vent overlooked the living room. Empty water bottles. Food wrappers. Our food. Things from our kitchen. Crackers and canned soup and fruit cups. A bucket with a lid that I don't want to think about. He'd been living up there, not just visiting. Living. For how long, no one could say for sure. But worse than that was the journal. 47 pages, handwritten in neat, precise letters. Dated entries going back 3 years, to Christmas 2018. Detailed notes on my family's routines. When we woke up, when we went to bed, what we ate for breakfast, what shows we watched on TV. Drawings of the house layout, accurate down to the furniture placement. Photographs taken through windows. My mother gardening in the summer. My father grilling in the backyard. Nina and me throwing a football in the front yard. He'd been watching us every Christmas for 3 years. Every holiday season, when the house was full and the family was together, he'd come back. He'd let himself in through the basement door that someone always forgot to lock. He'd climb up into the crawl space and settle in. And he'd watch. He'd listen. He'd write everything down. The last entry was dated December 24th, 2021. Christmas Eve. The night he finally spoke to us. Tonight is the night. I can feel it. They're going to find me. But I had to say goodbye. I had to let them know how much they meant to me. How much I loved them. Even if they never loved me back. He was never caught. The police tracked the footprints as far as the tree line, but the snow had covered everything by then. They searched the woods for days. They brought in dogs. They checked every abandoned building, every empty cabin, every car parked on the side of the road for miles around. Nothing. My parents sold the farmhouse 6 months later. They couldn't sleep there anymore. None of us could. Every creak of the floorboards, every rattle of the pipes, every draft from the old windows. It all sounded like footsteps. It all sounded like someone watching. I still think about him sometimes. Whoever he was. What the right time meant. What he would have done if my dad hadn't had that rifle. What he was planning for that Christmas morning before we found out he was there. The journal didn't say. It just ended with that entry about saying goodbye. I proposed to Amelia 3 months later. Not on Christmas. Not in that house. In a park in Brooklyn on a random Tuesday afternoon, with no one watching, she said yes. But some nights, when I'm lying in bed and the house is quiet, I think about his voice coming through that vent. I think about all those years he watched us without us knowing. I think about the other families out there, in other farmhouses, in other places where the nearest neighbor is too far away to hear you scream. Some questions don't have answers, and some Christmases never feel safe again. That family survived because they found him in time. But some horrors don't reveal themselves until years later, when you're old enough to understand what you witnessed as a child. Story 3. The Charity Santa. He leaned in close, so close I could smell mothballs and something sour underneath, like old sweat trapped in a costume that had never been washed. His beard was real, not the cheap synthetic kind you see at malls. It was yellowed in places, wiry, tangled. His breath was warm against my ear. His eyes were a pale, washed-out blue, and there was nothing jolly in them at all. They looked flat, like the surface of a frozen pond. Then he whispered something only I could hear. "I know what you did to your sister's doll." I remember going completely cold. Not the kind of cold you feel when you step outside in December, but the kind that starts somewhere deep in your chest and spreads outward until your fingers go numb. I was 9 years old. My name is Cole, and up until that moment, the worst thing I'd ever done in my life was exactly what he mentioned. 3 weeks earlier, I'd snapped my little sister Penny's favorite doll in half. It wasn't on purpose. Not really. I'd been mad because she wouldn't stop following me around, copying everything I did. And when she left the doll on the couch, I grabbed it by the legs and twisted. One of the arms snapped clean off. The look on her face when she saw what I'd done scared me more than my parents ever had. I panicked. I buried the doll in the backyard behind the shed in a patch of dirt no one ever touched once the ground froze. I told Penny she must have lost it somewhere. She cried for days. I never told anyone. Not my parents, not my friends, not a teacher, not a single soul. It was my secret. Just mine. So when this Santa, this stranger in a suit that smelled like old clothes and dust, whispered that sentence into my ear, it felt like the world shifted sideways. His gloved hand tightened just slightly on my shoulder, like he could feel how tense I'd gone. From a few feet away, it would have looked normal. A kid sitting on Santa's lap at the town Christmas party, leaning in to hear a special message. Parents drinking cocoa and coffee along the wall. Kids lined up in front of the community center stage, waiting their turn. String lights casting everything in warm red and green. No one could have known that my heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. No one could have heard the way his voice changed when he stopped the act. A moment earlier, he'd been booming and cheerful. "Ho, ho, ho, what do you want for Christmas?" The second he said my name, "Come on up here, Cole." Something in me tightened. I didn't remember telling anyone I'd gotten in line. I didn't remember him asking. He just knew. And then he leaned in, close enough that his beard brushed my cheek, and told me about the doll. "Secrets don't stay buried," he murmured, still smiling for the parents. "Not forever." Then, louder, loud enough for everyone to hear. "A skateboard, huh? That's a big gift. I'll see what I can do." He patted my back like everything was normal. Someone snapped a photo, me on his lap, his fake smile, my frozen face. I slid off his knee on stiff legs and walked back to where my mom was standing near the folding chairs, my throat so tight I couldn't talk. She ruffled my hair and asked what I'd told Santa I wanted. "A skateboard," I managed. My voice sounded wrong in my own ears, like it belonged to someone else. She smiled, satisfied, and turned to watch Penny, who was practically bouncing with excitement as she shuffled forward in the line. I wanted to grab her and drag her away. I wanted to scream, "Don't sit on his lap, don't let him touch you, don't go near him." But the words wouldn't come out. I just stood there, small and shaking, watching my sister move closer and closer to the man who knew my worst secret. Back then, in 1998, our town felt like the safest place in the world. It was one of those tiny communities in eastern Oregon that barely shows up on maps, the kind of place surrounded by pine forests and two-lane roads and more deer than people. Everybody knew everybody. My dad grew up there. My mom moved there after they got married. You couldn't go to the grocery store without running into someone you'd known since kindergarten. People left their doors unlocked. Kids rode their bikes down the middle of the street. In December, the whole town leaned into Christmas like it was a competition. Lights on every house, garlands around the lampposts, a big tree in the town square that the local hardware store donated every year. The community center, a squat brick building with a faded sign and a parking lot full of potholes, was the heart of it. That's where we had the Christmas party every year. The charity drive always brought in a Santa. Sometimes it was Mr. Lawson from the post office in a costume you could tell was fake from a mile away. Sometimes it was one of the high school coaches with a pillow stuffed under his shirt. We'd laugh because you could recognize their voices, their mannerisms, their jokes. That was part of the fun, pretending to believe while knowing it was just someone you'd see buying gas the next day. But that year, the Santa was different. No one recognized him. No one said, "Oh, that's Jim," or "That's old Mr. Hawkins from the feed store." Parents stood around with paper cups of cider, smiling, assuming someone else had arranged for him. Kids didn't care who was under the suit as long as there were candy canes. The adults were busy talking about snowplows and holiday travel and who was coming back to town from college. Nobody noticed the way this Santa's eyes followed the kids in line, one by one, like he was studying them. I noticed. At 9, you're in that weird space between believing and understanding. You're old enough to know that the world isn't exactly like the stories you're told, but young enough that some part of you still wants magic to be real. When I first saw him sitting there, I felt that flicker of doubt. The suit fit too well. The beard was too convincing. The way he moved, slow, heavy, like an old man whose bones hurt, didn't feel like someone pretending. It felt like someone who'd been doing this a very long time. When I got close enough to see his eyes, the flicker turned into something else. They were pale, like I said, almost white around the edges. But it wasn't the color that bothered me. It was the emptiness. I'd seen plenty of adults look tired or bored or annoyed, but this was different. It was like looking at a photograph of eyes instead of real ones. They didn't seem connected to anything behind them. They didn't warm when he smiled. They just watched. My little sister Penny was 6 that year. She had short, messy brown hair and a habit of holding onto the sleeve of whatever adult she trusted most in the room. That day, it was my mom. She clutched at Mom's sweater while she stared at Santa, like he was the greatest thing she'd ever seen. Every time he let out a ho ho ho, she giggled. When he called my name and I had to walk up there alone, I felt her fingers slip out of the fabric, like I was leaving my lifeline behind. The floor felt too big. The room felt too quiet, even with all the noise. I sat on his knee because that's what you're supposed to do. His leg was solid under the red pants, muscles or padding, or both. His gloved hand rested lightly on my shoulder, not tight, not inappropriate, just enough to keep me there. From the outside, nothing looked wrong. From where I was sitting, everything was wrong. "How are you, Cole?" he asked, and it took me a second to realize he'd used my name without anyone telling him. My mom hadn't said it. There were no name tags on the kids. His voice was deep, the kind that comes from the chest, but there was a strain under the hoarseness, like he didn't talk much the rest of the year. "You've grown since last Christmas," he added, and my stomach twisted because I knew I'd never seen this man before in my life. I stammered something about being fine. When he asked what I wanted for Christmas, I said the first thing that came to mind: a skateboard. He nodded, like that made sense, like he'd already known. Then he dipped his head closer to mine and dropped his voice into that whisper. That's when he told me about the doll. How did he know? That question lodged itself behind my ribs and never left. When I slid off his lap and walked back to my family, my legs felt like they were going to buckle. My mom didn't notice anything was wrong. Why would she? From her point of view, her son had just talked to Santa and come back with a stunned look she probably mistook for awe. "Did you say thank you?" she asked. I nodded. My throat hurt too much to speak. Penny tugged at my sleeve, eyes wide. "What did he say? Did he tell you if you were on the nice list?" I stared at her, at the gap between her front teeth, at the faint smudge of chocolate on her chin from the brownie she'd eaten earlier, and I thought about the grave of plastic and fabric behind the shed. "Yeah," I said finally. "Yeah, I'm on the nice list." My voice didn't sound like mine. I watched the rest of the kids go up one by one. A boy named Marcus came back from Santa's lap with his face completely drained of color. He wouldn't look at anyone and sat down in the corner by the coat rack, knees pulled up to his chest. A girl named Rebecca lasted about 10 seconds on his lap before she burst into tears and ran to her mother. The parents laughed it off. "She's shy. He always gets overwhelmed. You know how kids are." No one told them what Santa had whispered. The room was full of secrets, and the only one who seemed to understand that was wearing a red suit. I tried to listen for his whispers when other kids were up there. I strained my ears, pretending to be interested in the cookie decorating table, while my eyes tracked every move on the stage. But the music was too loud, the chatter too constant. All I caught were fragments. "You shouldn't have. Does your mom know? Why did you? And after each one, a child would come back looking like someone had flipped them inside out. Around 6 o'clock, the organizers called for everyone's attention. They announced the total donations for the charity drive, thanked local businesses, gave out a few raffle prizes. When I turned back to the stage, Santa's chair was empty. The man in the suit was gone. No one saw him stand up. No one saw him leave through the front door. I tugged on my dad's sleeve and pointed. Where did he go? My dad glanced up and shrugged. Probably needed a break. It's hot in those costumes. But when my mom asked one of the women from the church committee who'd arranged for Santa that year, the woman frowned. I thought you did, she said. Another volunteer said she thought the PTA had handled it. A third said she assumed he was with the fire department like last year. Within a couple of minutes, it became clear. Nobody in that room had hired him. No one called the police. Looking back as an adult, that detail makes my skin crawl. At the time, it just added another layer to the numbness I was already feeling. The conclusion everyone settled on, comfortably, lazily, was that some local group must have set it up, and the communication just got crossed. Either way, the kids got their Santa. Someone laughed. And that's what matters, right? I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, the beard, the eyes, the way his mouth barely moved when he whispered. I lay awake in my room listening to the house settle, to the wind against the windows, to the faint buzz of the heater kicking on and off. At some point, I got up, grabbed my coat, and tiptoed past my parents' room. The clock on the stove read 12:41 a.m. I slipped my boots on without tying them and stepped out into the backyard. The ground was hard, the top layer of snow crunching under my feet. I walked to the spot behind the shed where I'd buried Penny's doll. My breath came out in white clouds. The sky was clear enough to see the stars. In the glow from the kitchen window, I could just make out the disturbed patch of earth where I'd dug in November, then covered it up again. I don't know what I expected to find. Maybe nothing. Maybe the doll exactly where I left it. Maybe some kind of sign that Santa had been here, dug it up, and put it back. The ground was frozen solid. I tried to kick at it with the heel of my boot. It barely made a dent. After a few minutes, my toes started to go numb, and I gave up. But standing there, in that dark backyard with the shed hunched like a black shape next to me, I had the horrible feeling that someone else had stood in that exact spot. Maybe more than once. Maybe watching my window instead of the ground. Life went on. That's the cruel thing about childhood horror. Even the worst night of your life gets folded back into the routine of school and chores and homework. Christmas came and went. I got a skateboard, just like I'd asked. Penny never got another doll quite like the one I broke. Spring melted the snow. By summer, the memory had softened around the edges. I didn't tell anyone about the whisper. It sat in my chest like a stone. Every now and then, something would knock against it. A mention of Santa, a glimpse of a red coat in a store window, and the fear would flare up again. Then it would recede. I learned to live around it. Years passed. I grew up, moved out, went to college, left town. I became one of those people who only came back for holidays and funerals. By the time I was 35, I lived in Portland, working as a freelance audio producer and dabbling in podcasting. I'd started a small show about weird things that happened in small towns, mostly urban legends and local mysteries. Back Road Echoes, I called it. It had a handful of loyal listeners, mostly people who liked hearing about places that felt like the ones they grew up in. When December rolled around one year, and I was planning a Christmas episode, that memory, the one I'd buried almost as deep as the doll, surfaced. The Santa. The whisper. The way no one seemed to know who he was. I told myself I was doing it for the show, that it would make a good episode, that people love creepy Christmas stories. But the second I decided to dig into what happened that winter in 1998, I knew it was more than content. It was unfinished business. It was a question that had lived in my head for 26 years, waiting for an answer. I drove back to my hometown a week before Christmas. The roads felt smaller than I remembered. The forests on either side seemed taller. The town itself hadn't changed much. A few new businesses, a couple of old ones gone. But the same gas station, the same diner, the same faded sign at the edge of the city limits welcoming you in. My parents still lived in the same house. They were older, grayer, but their habits were exactly the same. My dad still read the paper at the kitchen table every morning. My mom still hummed when she cooked. Penny had moved to Seattle, but she was coming in 2 days later with her husband and their toddler. I had time. The first place I went, after dropping my stuff at the house, was the library. It had been remodeled since I was a kid. New carpet, new shelves. The shelves actually labeled now. But the back room with the old newspapers on microfilm was exactly the same. I pulled the rolls for December 1998 and started scrolling. I expected to find some mention of the charity Santa, maybe a photo in the community section. Kids enjoy holiday cheer at annual party. Something like that. Instead, I found nothing. No article, no photo, no caption. There were write-ups about the toy drive totals, about a local choir performance, even about a bake sale for the fire department. But nothing about Santa. It was like he'd never been there. The absence itself felt like a clue. I broadened the search. Looking at December 1998 statewide news, I hit something that made my heart stutter. A short piece, buried near the bottom of a page. A man had been released from a psychiatric facility about 50 miles away on December 18th. No name, due to privacy regulations. The article mentioned that he'd been committed in the mid-1980s after being convicted of offenses against children. It noted that his release was controversial, but legally mandated, and that local residents were concerned, but hopeful for his rehabilitation. There was no photo, just a description. Male, late 50s, heavy set, white beard, blue eyes. The dates lined up too neatly. Released on the 18th, our charity party on the 20th. The facility was close enough that even a person on foot could have made it to our town with a couple days' travel. A person with a car or a bus ticket could have done it easily. I sat there in the dim microfilm room with my notebook open in front of me, staring at that paragraph until the words blurred. I knew, in that way, you know something even before you admit it to yourself, that the man in that article and the Santa from my childhood were the same person. I wanted more. I wanted a name, a paper trail, something concrete. But everything else was buried under layers of privacy law and sealed records. I hit wall after wall. No one wanted to talk about a mentally ill ex-offender they'd released into the world 20-some years ago. At some point, I realized I'd hit the limit of what I could learn from documents. The rest of the answers, if there were any, lived in people. So I went looking for them. I talked to the old neighbors first, the ones who were still alive. Most of them remembered the Christmas party that year in a hazy, generic way. Oh, yeah, the one with the big tree, right? Was that the year the power went out? But when I asked specifically about the Santa, did they remember who he was? Who hired him? Anything strange? I got a lot of frowns and deflections. One woman said she thought he'd been with a charity group from the city. Another said she assumed he was connected to the church. No one wanted to say, I don't know. No one wanted to admit they'd never asked. Finally, at the bar out by the highway, I found someone willing to say something real. His name was Ray, an old mechanic who'd been middle-aged when I was a kid, and now looked like he was carved out of dried leather. He nursed a beer at the far end of the counter and watched me in the mirror when I said the words, "That Santa from '98." For a second, something flickered across his face. Then he wiped it away. "There are some things you don't put on a podcast, kid," he said. "Some things, you let stay dead." "I just want to know who he was," I said. "That's all." Ray stared into his beer for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. "You want to know who hired him?" he asked. "Nobody. He hired himself." He didn't say much more than that, but it was enough to send me back to the library with a new search term. That's when I found the second article. Not in our town's paper, but in the regional one serving the county. Dated December 29th, 1998. Unidentified man found dead in woods outside. Town name. The article described a body discovered by hunters about 3 miles outside our town, in a patch of state forest. Male, approximately late 50s to early 60s. White beard, heavy set. Clothing described as unusual for the weather, including remnants of a red coat and black boots. No identification. No missing person report matching his description. The preliminary cause of death was listed as exposure, but the sheriff's office declined to comment further pending investigation. There were no follow-up articles. The story disappeared. If I hadn't gone looking for it on purpose, I would never have known it existed. I took a copy of the article home and sat at my parents' kitchen table, staring at it. They were out in the yard, stringing lights on the bushes even though it was freezing. The house smelled like ham and cloves. For a few minutes, I considered not asking them anything. Some part of me wanted to let it lie, to leave that version of Santa buried in the past with the doll and the backyard and the whispered threat about secrets. But then I thought about all the kids who sat on his lap that night. Marcus, still and pale in the corner. Rebecca, sobbing into her mother's coat. Me, frozen under the weight of knowledge I wasn't supposed to have, and I knew I couldn't just walk away from it. My mom came in first, stomping the snow off her boots, cheeks red from the cold. She saw the paper on the table and the way I was looking at her. For a second, something passed over her face. A tightness around the eyes, a flicker of recognition. Then she covered it. "What's that?" she asked, trying for casual. "Did you know they found a man in the woods after that Christmas?" I asked. My voice came out sharper than I intended. After the year with the Santa who nobody hired? She froze, just for a second. It was enough. She looked older in that moment than I'd ever seen her, tired in a way that had nothing to do with age. She pulled out a chair and sat down slowly. "Who told you about that?" "The newspaper," I said. "And Ray, sort of. I've been looking into it. For the podcast." At first, she didn't say anything. She just stared at her hands, folded on the table, fingers laced so tightly her knuckles turned white. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft. "We hoped you kids would forget." I told her about the whisper, about the doll, about how that sentence had lived inside me like a splinter for decades. She listened without interrupting, eyes shining with something between guilt and grief. When I finished, she looked toward the window, out at the yard where my dad was still fussing with the lights, like nothing in the world had ever been wrong. "The men found out who he was," she said at last. "Not right away. Not that night. But soon after. Someone recognized him from the news, or from before. I don't know the details. I wasn't in that part of the conversations. What I do know is that word got around that there was a man in town who had no business being near children. A man who came to our party dressed as Santa without being invited." I swallowed. "And then?" She took a long breath. "And then the men did what men around here have always done when they feel the law isn't enough. They handled it." That phrase landed in my stomach like a stone. "Handled it how?" She shook her head. "I don't know everything. I don't want to know everything. I know some of them went out looking for him. I know they found him. I know he died out there in those woods. I know the sheriff wrote it up as exposure. No one asked too many questions. The town didn't want them answered. I thought about the article, the lack of follow-up, the way everyone at the bar had tensed up when I mentioned that year. So they killed him. I didn't say that, she replied quickly, but there was no conviction in it. I said they handled it. They made sure he wouldn't hurt anybody again. She looked at me then, really looked, like she was seeing the 9-year-old and the 35-year-old at the same time. You were a child, Cole. You weren't supposed to carry that. We decided, the grown-ups decided, it would be kinder if the kids didn't know. So we didn't talk about it. We never mentioned him again. But he knew things, I said. He knew my name. He knew about Penny's doll. How? My mom's expression turned haunted. You think you're so private, even in a small town, she said quietly. But kids talk. Adults talk. You think your secrets are safe, but people notice more than you think. You don't know who hears what at the grocery store or in the pew behind you at church. You don't know who's watching when you think you're alone in your yard. I don't know how he knew about that doll, Cole. Maybe he saw you. Maybe he heard something. Maybe he was just good at guessing, at saying things that would hit close to home. People like him, they specialize in knowing where to cut. That answer didn't satisfy me, but I could tell it was all she was willing to give. Or all she had. Maybe she was right. Maybe he'd seen something from the tree line. Maybe he'd overheard Penny crying to a friend. Maybe he'd watched us longer than anyone realized. The idea that he'd been hovering around our lives for days or weeks before that party made my skin crawl in a new way. That night, after my parents went to bed, I went out to the backyard. It had snowed earlier, just a light dusting, enough to smooth over the imperfections in the ground. The shed was still there, paint peeling, roof sagging a little more than it had when I was a kid. I walked around behind it, to the spot where I'd stood all those years ago in my winter coat and boots too big for my feet, staring at the frozen earth where my sister's doll was buried. This time, the ground wasn't frozen. It was damp, soft, the way Oregon soil gets when it rains for days. I knelt down and started digging with my hands. It was stupid, messy work. Cold mud under my fingernails, the smell of wet dirt in my nose. Part of me expected to find nothing, to be faced with the reality that memory is unreliable, that maybe I'd made some of this up, twisted it over time into something bigger than it was. But about 6 inches down, my fingers closed around something hard and smooth. Plastic. I pulled it out slowly. It was the doll. Or what was left of it. The body was stained and dirty, the dress shredded, one arm still missing. The face was intact, eyes blank, hair matted with soil. I sat back on my heels and stared at it in the weak light from the bathroom window. After all these years, after all the layers of time and denial and silence, the evidence of what I'd done, of what he'd known, was still here. I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt hollow. I put the doll back in the hole and covered it. Not out of shame this time, but out of something like respect. It felt like a grave now, and graves shouldn't be left open. People love tidy endings. They want the monster caught, the town saved, the lesson learned. They want to know that the bad man is gone, and that the children he scared grew up fine and forgot all about him. I wish I could give you that. I wish I could tell you that the men who handled it did the right thing, or the wrong thing, or that there's some clear moral here. But the truth is messier. A man who had no business being near kids came into our town, dressed as the one figure every child is taught to trust. He whispered things he shouldn't have known into their ears. The town found out who he was, and made sure he didn't leave the woods alive. Then they buried the story and called it protection. I still don't know exactly what happened out there among those trees. I don't know if the men who went after him are heroes, villains, or something in between. I don't know if the sheriff turned a blind eye because he agreed with them, or because he was scared of what would happen if the full truth came out. I don't know how many of the kids from that night still wake up sometimes with the feeling of a beard against their cheek and a voice in their ear. What I do know is this. A stranger came to our Christmas party, sat in a borrowed chair at the front of our community center, and looked into the eyes of children he'd never met before. He called them by name, told them things they thought no one else knew, and walked back out into the night like he'd just been running an errand. For him, maybe, it was just another stop. For us, it split the holiday in two, before and after. My mom says some things are better left in the past, that digging them up only brings pain. Maybe she's right. Maybe all I've done is reopen an old wound, for myself, and for a town that learned a long time ago how to keep its ghosts quiet. But standing out there in the dark with the unearthed doll in my hands, I realized something. The past doesn't stay buried just because you refuse to look at it. It lives on in the way you flinch when you hear certain songs, in the way you triple-check your locks in December, in the way you watch mall Santas with a little more suspicion than the people around you. Some Christmas stories have happy endings. Some have moral lessons tied up in neat little bows. And some, the ones you don't tell around the tree, just stop. Not because they're over, but because everyone involved decided, silently and together, that the last chapter would never be written down. The man in the Santa suit died in the woods outside my town almost 3 decades ago. The men who handled it are old now, or dead themselves. The kids he whispered to grew up, moved away, had families of their own. On paper, it's over. But every year, when the lights go up and the carols start playing, and the first Santa of the season appears in a store window, I think about him. About the way his beard scratched my cheek. About the weight of his hand on my shoulder. About the sentence he chose to open with. I know what you did. Some Christmas ghosts don't rattle chains or slam doors. They just sit patiently in your memory, waiting for you to dig them up.